Are dads essential? Are they required? It's okay to be angry with the system. It's okay to be angry at the situation. It's okay to have feelings, right? Do children, do they not read as well because there's gatekeeping involved? Can they grow up effectively without a dad? Now we're going to rip it apart. Now figure it out.
Today's guest is someone whose research has literally changed how the academic world understands the relationship between mothers and fathers when it comes to raising kids. Dr. Daniel Puhlman is an assistant professor of family studies at the University of Maine and director of the Parenting Relationships Research Lab. He holds a PhD from Florida State, and he's been practicing marriage and family therapy for over 15 years. He created the maternal gatekeeping scale. Can we talk about this? The actual scientific measure that researchers worldwide now use to study how mothers influence fathers' involvement with their children. He also built Coexist, an app designed to help high-conflict co-parents communicate about their kids. And his latest research is pushing how AI can support healthier family relationships. So on top of all of that, he's a dad of 3 boys, a hockey player, and a Pittsburgh kid. Let's get it. Dr. Puhlman, Dan, thank you so much for being here. Man, I've been looking forward to this one. Before the lab and the research, how was your upbringing? Talk about that. Your own family, what pulled you into studying how parents work together. It's always interesting to me to hear, like someone like you, like I geek out over like like almost matrixing your brain, right? And just seeing how you think and just what you study. I think it's amazing. But everyone always has like a how did that happen and a why. I'm curious to hear yours.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in a pretty, middle class family, typical situation, mom, dad, brother, sister kind of thing, and lived my life pretty normally for quite a while. When I had hit that like 18-year range, 18 years old, my parents ended up splitting up, right? They got a divorce. I mean, there was conflict and stuff happening in my family, but it's kind of surprising, and so I went through this experience as basically an adult of divorce in my family, which is I'm off to college and experiencing that. And so, really trying to navigate that and feeling the pressures and stresses of that overall. And it probably was an instrumental kind of experience that pushed me into looking at working with families and human services. And so, went through college, graduated, always had this kind of lingering idea of, yeah, maybe go back to school. And then eventually got bit by the therapy bug. And so, okay, I'm going to be a therapist, right? Went and got my master's degree, had been working as well, doing in-home family work with families in the Pittsburgh area. And then, somebody said, hey, go get a PhD, go learn more. And I was like, all right, cool. And so I ended up going to Florida State and learning all about fathering. In the meantime, I had gotten married to my first wife and had a beautiful child, my oldest, and got really excited about fathering. And so that happened right before I went to my PhD program. And so I went there, I was like, hey, I think studying dads is going to be the place to be, right? This is what I want to do. And so, in my interviews, I talked about it and discussed it and managed to find a really great mentor at Florida State, Cape Hasley. And I was like, oh, this is going to be good. I'm going to study dads. As I got into that process, things became difficult for me in that marriage. And so things dissolved and we ended up separating while I was in my PhD program. And that really pushed me more towards this idea of, well, what about co-parenting, right? Dads are important, but this is only part of the picture. And so my research kind of moved into this space of understanding how parents, engage with each other, how they work together, how they don't work together. And so, from there, I really kind of adapted this idea. So I've always had that fathering piece that's been a big part of it, but then that co-parenting side of it became really predominant in my work, and kind of it has led me to where I am today.
So the marriage and family therapy piece has been around, give or take, 15 years. So I'm curious, I have a master's in psychology. Like, what did you see the difference of, you go to your night classes and they teach you the stuff with the data and the books. What did the real world kind of teach you that maybe the data didn't? It's almost like, I guess it's like when you're going off to war. It's like first you start in basic, but when you're out there and things are getting live, it's a little bit different experience.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Actually, what's funny about that whole story is that in my undergrad program, I probably learned more about research and how to empirically evaluate things. I went to Allegheny College, which is a small school in Pennsylvania, and probably got a better experience there. When I went into my master's program and before that, I was probably learning, while I was learning more about real world stuff than I was data. So I actually had the reverse experience where I learned about the real world, the clinical experiences, what it means to be a family, what kind of struggles families go with. And then I went into the data, right? More deeply, which was like an interesting perspective because I could take those experiences and apply them. And so kind of that intersection happened in a little bit of a reverse way than for some people where they do go to the data first and then the experience. And I think that just probably made me a better clinician and researcher overall because I now can combine those ideas, you know.
So your superpower, obviously, is with all of your schools. So that's amazing. So the big one, right? Let's get into the big one. So you're a researcher who's redefined maternal gatekeeping, and I know we're going to talk about this for a bit, and build the actual scale to measure it. So for the dads listening who felt this but never had a name for it, what is maternal gatekeeping?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so first, before we can even continue the conversation, I think we need to like reframe that a little bit. So the idea of maternal gatekeeping came on the scene in the late 90s, really related to traditional gender roles in families. And since then, researchers, and I've been part of this conversation, have shifted the language to really think about it more as parental gatekeeping, that both parents can engage in a process of limiting or enhancing the involvement that they have in the lives of their children, right? And so we've kind of moved away from this idea. So I think talking about parental gatekeeping is probably more beneficial. However, the origins of this story certainly do start with that maternal gatekeeping. And, by the time that narrative really shifted, my publications around my gatekeeping scale had already been out there. And so, it's still that way. But yeah, we think about parental or parents that are kind of interfering or facilitating the involvement with their children.
Now, do you think would it be similar, some differences of a married kind of unified front per se, at least front facing, or a divorce or shared custody situation? Do you see that there is overlap and it correlates, or does it exist potentially independent? How is that the comparison of both? Like, would you say there's similarities?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So the idea of gatekeeping just kind of came out around divorced families. Actually, the idea of co-parenting in general started with divorce, right? Because people thought, oh, well, if you're living across households, then you must be working together in some way. And so many people for a long time, and still do even think about co-parenting as an exclusively divorced experience. Well, what we realize now is that that's not true, right? That co-parenting happens in both places. Does it look different? 100%. Is gatekeeping different? Yeah, it is. And I'd say that a lot of my earlier work are, really kind of focused more on that divorced experience, but others have started talking about, what does gatekeeping look like in intact families? How does it different? Do we need to measure it different?
So you have sons. I have daughters. So I say that because, my daughters, you do like Dan, right? The bippity boppity boo. So if I gave you that ability to bippity boppity boo, you could do, because you bring up studies and research a lot. I was just curious on an aside. If you could do any study right now with unlimited funding, within a reason, I'm not Elon Musk, but what would you specifically right now, going into the spring, 2026, with your amazing wealth of experience, your degrees, your practicality, in the therapist space, what would you, if you could do any study right now, what would it be?
Whew, wow. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have now is kind of the experiences of divorce and the conflict that's happening in the court systems and the experiences of families to try to, find out what is in the best interest of the children. And I think that's a big question that we need to know more about. I think, I would focus research on that and really start looking at not just what is it that, what kind of solutions are best, but what do those look like? What are the interventions? What are the strategies that we can put into place that are best for kids, right? There's some open questions around, should one parent have more contact or be the primary parent over the other? And that's becoming a really more prominent idea in the literature at this point. And so I'd want to know, what does that look like? How can we get there? And what is best? What are the best solutions? We just don't have enough data and knowledge yet, and we're still working on that. So I designed a study around that, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you say we had a pandemic, a COVID pandemic, but it's almost like all of a sudden, to your point, my parents got divorced in the 90s. All of a sudden, everyone started getting a divorce, right? And you had like this specific thing, almost like an analogy of a virus. It's actually funny. And then what happens? There were nothing, just like people were just winging it. I can guarantee you, I love my dad, he's my bro. He just winged it. And a lot of times when you're winging it, it's like, what do? maybe you didn't have because of the gatekeeping, which will continue on some of the, you call it maybe maternal, but it's really just like some of the parental stuff because of the gatekeeping maybe that was existing at home. So typically, what do you do? Lean into your mom. Hey, mom, which is now grandma, I need some help. And just because you lean into grandma doesn't mean A, you have the best relationship with, your mother. I have a great relationship with mine. I know plenty of guys that actually don't. So they're leaning into kind of an awkward situation. Or number two, would be, what if mom didn't really do a good job? And now you're perpetuating that, into your kids as well. So, I just would be curious around that. It's just getting a divorce is such a big thing developmentally, whether the kids are, 1 or 3, whether they're 11 or 13. And it just seems like we're doing so many things that like you just kind of wing when it's one of the most important things, and it has such a huge impact, I guess, on the kids. So that, to your point, I would literally be side by side with those studies because number one, being a great dad is super important, being intentional, being present. But it's just something that many times guys wing. Hence, here we are at Dad Are Up, right? Pressing the agenda that I want to celebrate fatherhood. I want to celebrate being an intentional dad. But also, like, you need an SOP. I know it's like a business speak, but, you could lose weight. I could help you, Daniel, start your own business, especially now with AI, right? You want to get a six-pack? There's a group for that. You want to work on mental health? There's a group for that. It's just, from a dad perspective, there's nothing much for that. And then hyper-focus more on the divorce side. So much goes into, right? Guys are spending money. There's attorneys. Now, all of a sudden, they're alone with the kids, right or wrong or different. Maybe because of gatekeeping, they weren't. So I appreciate you sharing on that study. I would be right there, right by your side.
Family life is complicated. Andrew. Like, there's a lot that happens, right? And it's never consistent. It's never the same. It's always shifting, right? From the social expectations around what fathering means and what it is, to what people think of as the role of the father, to, how do other family members involve themselves in that? And so you take this really kind of concept of family and you say, okay, well, here's how my family works. And then you take this kind of complete overly stressed experience, say, okay, now we're going to rip it apart. Now figure it out. Find out what you're going to do with it now. And we do. We ask people to kind of just solve it and know the solutions. And, and if they don't get it right, we know. And if they get it too right, we know that. And there's so much really like cloudiness around these issues. And so it's hard to know what to do and what's the best. And where do we go with it, right? Coping, your own emotional intensity around it is insane, right?
Yeah, trying to take care of the house when you're inside, your house is on fire, but now you're responsible for, your 1, 2, 3 little creatures at home. So, speak to me a little more about gatekeeping, the control, the encouragement, the discouragement. Can you walk us through that? Because most people assume gatekeeping is just like, mom won't let dad help, but it's clearly more complex than that.
Sure is. So, in the model that we kind of came up with, there's this idea that there's 3 dimensions, right? And this is debatable. Other scholars have had conversations and have offered other perspectives, So, to say that this is the perspective, I don't know. But the general gist of the model is to say, you have a parenting or co-parenting can be a way in which you encourage the other person, right? Support them, facilitate their involvement, give them messages that they're wanted, they're valued, that, that they have a benefit. Not only giving them those messages, the other parent, but also giving the kids the messages that the other parent is important, right? So that encouragement side, and that's a really big piece of it. Then you have this idea of discouragement, right, in this model that is about giving those messages that they're not wanted, that there's this kind of creating barriers or creating making things difficult or providing criticism or other types of kind of attitudes that kind of speak to this, like, well, what you're doing isn't right or good or it's bad, right? And this value judgment. We separated those 2 concepts, encouragement and discouragement, under the idea that you can actually do both at the same time, right? Because it's not as clear as, well, you're either discouraging or you're encouraging. A lot of parents can do both, right? Maybe I'm encouraging in one area where I'm like really encouraging around something, but I'm really discouraging in the other. Like, hey, go coach your kids, be involved with sports. But if you start touching the educational side of things, right, there's a discouraging aspect that goes there. So we separated them because that's an important distinction, right? You can do both at the same time or even neither at the same time, not discourage or encourage, just be very neutral. And then you add that 3rd dimension in, which is the control, which is how much say-so do they have, right? Court orders are obvious, right? A court says, yeah, you're the primary parent. They have control of that. But in a lot of families, especially around shared custody, the idea of control is maybe more ambiguous. Where is the control lie? Who has control? Who has say so, right? For a long time, this model of gatekeeping came up with women tended to have more control in the home. They were the ones responsible for the domestic responsibilities, good or bad or otherwise. That's kind of how that worked. And, there's still lingering remnants of that. And so this idea of who is in control certainly influences that. If I'm in control and I'm discouraging you, it's going to have a different impact than if you're in control and I'm discouraging you, right? One is actually impactful. One may be seen as more complaining or whining, right? And there's a lot of nuance in that too.
Yeah, I'd be curious to ask you. Let's pretend we're just two guys watching an NFL game, having a beer, just talking us bros. And I know you're super educated, and I go, hey, Daniel, I'm just curious. As the Jets are losing to the Steelers, of course. Hey, I'm just curious. There seems to be this thing in society that, like, the mother is the more, developmentally responsible, can do the thing where the dad provides, financially and is there physically. And, like, we're trying to really redefine what that means, especially in dad era. But if I was like, for someone that's extremely educated, very smart, has the street experience, is there anywhere in science that was ever proven true?
Help me out with
that the mom specifically is more important developmentally for the child over the, up until 16, 18 than the dad? Or is it they both have just as important roles?
Yeah, I think to say that science said anything about that, I think that would be an unfair statement, right? I think the science has really kind of identified that parents are important, period. Good parenting is important, right? There was some conversations in the 80s in the literature around, well, are dads essential? Are they required? Can kids be raised? Can they grow up effectively without a dad, right? Because absentee fathers and it was a really big conversation around that. And so a lot of the literature said, well, not necessarily. I mean, kids can do pretty well and they don't need a dad involved. Is it good? Sure, right? And so I don't know that the science is really clear about that. I think the science says that when dads are involved in a positive way, when two parents are involved in a family, dad, mom, mom, dad, whatever, that is helpful for resources and support and things like that. Those are certainly things that we know. Is there a unique influence on dads from dads? I mean, I think so. There's ways that dads contribute in certain ways. Do kids miss out because of not having one? I don't know. I certainly think healthy and positive dads are super important, right? So I think, yeah. Science-wise, that's a complicated question. I don't know if that's completely settled.
Yeah, and that would be part of our bippity-boppity-boo study with unlimited research and funding, naturally. Yeah, it's funny. I speak to a ton of dads, and I always hear, around the gatekeeping thing. Preemptively, I had a lot of conversations with some of our members, and I try to step up, and I'm told I'm doing it wrong, so I stop trying. So, like, for you, what does research say happens to a father's involvement when he's on the receiving end of gatekeeping over time?
Yeah, so the research out there about that says that it's not a good thing, right? If the gatekeeping is more restrictive, right? If it's about keeping dads out or discouraging or being more negative, that can be problematic, right? Especially if a dad wants to, right? It could lead to an outcome where maybe a dad doesn't want to, right? It pushes them away to the point where they maybe say, no, I don't really want to be part of this, or the fight is too great. And so, it could have a negative impact. Certainly is going to exacerbate conflict if dads want to be involved. And so that can go a lot of different directions, right? I think that's one of the things that science is trying to grip to, and trying to figure out what exactly is that impact. Does it make a difference? What are the outcomes? Do children, for example, do they not read as well because there's gatekeeping involved? Certainly facilitative gatekeeping is beneficial, right? But is it beneficial if dad doesn't want to do it too? I don't know, right? If dad's like, nah, I'm not interested in being involved, and she's like, come on, help, and he's like, nah, I'm not interested, that can't be a good thing, right? So it's complicated. It's really complicated.
Yeah, we could paint a picture. So, like, what if, which really should be the picture, what if the parents are on the same page, whether they're married, they're on the same page? And listen, I know in, like, relationship therapy, you would know better, 60 or 70, 80% of relationships have a specific thing that they have a disagreement on, and, like, they just have to, one person compromise 100-0. But, say there is healthy co-parenting with two parents, whether married or separated, divorced, healthy co-parenting where they're on the same page. So, like, as an example, your parenting relationships lab, it looks at that across the board. What do you think from a co-parenting perspective Like, what should we see? What does it look like when parents are on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, kids do better, right? When parents are working effectively, when they're nurturing their kids, when they're supporting them in a harmonious way, you know, kids are going to just do better, right? They're able to, it frees them up to be more attentive to the things that they should be doing, like making friends and hanging out with people and building social skills and, understanding where they're good and where they need to practice and, being able to do that stuff. They're not worried about that their parents are angry and hate each other or mad or there's conflict, right? They're able to be kids, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, that's can happen in a bunch of different ways. It could happen where two parents really get along and spend time together and maybe even spend holidays. It can happen in separate homes too, right? Where dad has his home, mom has his home in a heterosexual family, and that they kind of do their own thing. And, as long as kids have that boundary and understand that, and that there's no bad mouthing and negativity around the other parent, kids just do better. They're more able to reach their potential, which is what we want for all kids.
Absolutely. So you built Coexist. So it's an app for high conflict co-parents to communicate about their kids. So what gap were you trying to fill? I'm interested in what have you seen it do for families?
Yeah, so that app is still in R&D at the moment, so we're still working on that. The idea behind that was to provide some form of intervention strategy geared towards high conflict parents. For some of these families that don't co-parent, they can't even be in the same room or the same space, right? And technology now has the ability for us to be able to maybe harness strategies around that. Text messaging or messaging. There's a number of different apps that are similar to this, like Co-Parenter, there's our Two Homes, there's our Family Wizard, and so there's a number of them that do that same sort of thing. The idea with Coexist is to take that more to the intervention space. So to do the same sorts of things that they do, but provide more feedback. So be able to use some technology, AI oriented, to interpret and understand messages going back and forth and maybe provide feedback to each parent. Say, hey, man, maybe try this or maybe try that to really shift the conversation. So that was one part of it. The other part of Coexist was to kind of build in some gamification where there's ability for the co-parents to kind of work together over certain tasks that are benign, that are not related to their children, to help them build cooperation, negotiation, and engagement skills, where they can be together and kind of engage with one another around something not related to parenting that isn't so emotionally loaded, and then transfer that into some of those strategies. So that kind of collective support system that creates an opportunity for parents to learn how to do this differently, because it's hard, right? And so we need strategies. We need ways to teach them, especially with the people that can't sit maybe in a therapy room together or they can't engage with each other in conversation.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So right now I'm going to try to steal for our listeners a nugget from you. So I'm going to steal something. So some of our members and some of the audience, some have been through a divorce. Some of the divorces weren't the best, or the custody situation isn't the best. So what's the strategies for a dad who's navigating a separation or custody situation right now, and he feels like, oh, Dan, the system, it's stacked against me. So what does research say? What's your opinion on how he can stay engaged with his kids, even in that awkward kind of, environment that may be hostile?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of lean into more of my clinical expertise there because I think, I'm not sure that I haven't experienced that research really kind of gives a lot of great advice in this area. Real world experience, kind of engaging with them. That is a frustration. And I guess one of the first things that came to mind when you're saying is like, take care of yourself. Right? Dads need to address that, right? It's okay to be angry with the system. It's okay to be angry at the situation. It's okay to have feelings, right? It's okay to be like, I'm so ticked off that I can't be with my kids or as much as I want to be with my kids or have the same kind of involvement with them. Those are normal pieces, right? So take care of that, right? Seek out some therapy. Seek out some support for you, people that can give you that kind of pat on the back or just kind of help you carry on. Because if you don't take care of yourself, then you end up, even if you don't do it intentionally, it comes out on the kids. It comes out on them. They see it. They feel it, right? And if they feel that anger, that animosity, that frustration and stress, that's going to really disrupt your own relationship with your children. That's going to create an opportunity for them to be like, well, dad's angry and ticked off, and I don't know if I want to be around that, right? And so, taking care of oneself and making sure your needs are met as a dad is really important.
Yeah, it's cool that you said that because, the core, like for me, the core foundation pieces of data up are three things. So at least part of it is number one, really the macro is that guys have feelings. Dan, I don't know if you knew this. Guys are human. I know we grew up and it's like hunter gatherer and like, no, don't like if you're out with your boys watching a Steelers game, it's like, come on, Dan, what are you in your feelings? What are you, a girl? But guess what? Like it's not true. Guys, no matter how big or tough, they have feelings. So that's like the kind of like the shell of it. And it's really three things. One, validation. And that's what you just said. Guys need to feel, because humans need validation. What you're saying is, this is hard. This sucks. All the feelings being validated that like, I get it. That's number one. Number two is reassurance of like, listen, man, I know right now you feel like there's a cloud over you. I promise you, whether it's my personal experience or plenty of other guys in our ecosystem here, our community, it will get better. I'm not going to tell you it's going to get better today. I'm not going to tell you it's going to get better tomorrow. Maybe it won't get better in a year, but eventually I'm giving you the reassurance that it will improve. And then third is really, to me, just reframing, Dan, what it means to fail. Especially, guys or if they're entrepreneurs or, people that are very, type A. It's like, I got a divorce. I ruined my kid's life. I'm a failure. All those really hard cognitive thoughts. And it's just, to me, a big core belief of DataUp is just redefining what failure means. To me, it's not getting knocked down. To me, being a great dad is progress, not perfection. It's working on yourself a little bit each day. So that's like our true core belief, which is like, listen, I don't expect people to bat 1,000, but I do expect that if you get knocked down, you don't stay down. So those are the three things that what you just said, which is really validation, it reminds me of. So I appreciate you saying that because I couldn't agree more. Dads, no matter how big, tough, whatever, we are humans that have emotions that need validation.
Well, and specifically the last, like this idea of validation and framing are two things that absolutely get missed when we're talking about divorce and for dads and for moms. I mean, moms have their own struggles too, right? And so, I think that's super important because, it's taken us a long time to just simply reframe divorce from being a dysfunctional family problem, right? Now we think of divorce as kind of just, it's almost normative, right? It happens so frequently. It's something that occurs, right? There's some theories around transitions that it's just kind of like we have to adapt this as just a possible place in our lives that a divorce happens. There's not as much judgment to that. So even reframing that idea of divorce as this ultimate failure of terribleness has been a challenge in and of itself. How does that relate to dads feeling like maybe they were unsuccessful or they're poor dads, or this idea of perfection, like you said, validating and saying, well, I don't have to be a perfect dad. I can make mistakes. If I can share a personal example, I was with my oldest son and in the middle of the hottest part of my divorce, right? It was tough and stressed. I was overwhelmed. And, I was sitting at the table and I had asked him, I said, please stop kicking the table, right? And he kind of looked at me and I was kind of in my own headspace. I was just driving crazy. And I felt the table moving or something like that. And I go, stop. And I turned to him and I stop kicking the table. Like I yelled at him and he didn't move a muscle. And I looked under the table and he was completely sitting still and never touched it. And it was like, it broke my heart and like, oh my God, I totally screwed up, right? What a terrible father. And it was an emotional experience that kind of shifted me to thinking like, wow, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to say you're sorry, right? It's about building a relationship, right? And so I guess that's, back to the other question about dads, right? And the things that you're talking about, these pillars, it's about that relationship. Dads need to focus on having a relationship with their kids that means something to both of them, right? That's super important.
Yeah, I appreciate all that. I mean, we could grant it on another opportunity for us to speak. We could dive into that more. I would ask your opinion, talk it up for everything you just said is super poignant and super amazing. So thank you. So let's get in a little bit to some of this AI stuff. I mean, literally the algorithms, Dan, they know, again, that I'm a Jet fan, unfortunately. Number two, that I like to grill. So now all of a sudden I see all these grilling things. And number three, that I'm like kind of figuring out this whole AI thing. So your latest research shows how AI and tech can actually strengthen family relationships. It's a conversation really most people aren't having yet. So what are you seeing in the AI space as it relates to all of this?
It's funny. We're gonna have this conversation, and tomorrow it'll be outdated.
Yeah, in 3 months. Oh, Claude issued the new family. Yeah, exactly.
AI is really fascinating in so many ways, right? My paper, we really were looking at, and this kind of relates to the Coexist app of how can AI be used as a relationship intervention. And there's a lot of conversations, right? There's ways in which AI is used to support clinicians. There's ways that AI is kind of being developed to think about it as self-sustaining intervention, all right? we need to be cautious about that because there's a lot of risk that goes into it. There's a lot of ethical problems,
Yeah,
from
if you
data
just let an
collection.
LLM or an AI just organically take a therapeutic convo where someone's at their low in the pit and not having that human side, like what could go wrong, quote unquote. I'm sure they're going to make, a Keanu Reeves movie about that soon.
Yeah, right. Seriously. I mean, yeah, you could make a lot of movies, and there's a lot there that becomes so complicated, right? It's funny to me that, and maybe your listeners have done this too, the extent to which people are using chatbots and AI functioning as a therapist, right? People are going into ChatGPT.
And
I hear
saying,
this
what should
all
I
the
do?
time.
What should I do? Yeah.
And they not just the what should I do, give me advice, but like it's a conversation, right? I can go into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever and say, hey, what do you think about this? Oh, what do you think about that? And I've heard people take some of their own work, the things that they've written, and said, analyze this for me, right? Almost using it as this therapist that is giving them feedback, which, nothing wrong with collecting data. I think we need to be careful with some of those things. I think those are risky spaces, right? It's so uncharted and so like, oh my God, what are we doing here? Is this good? Is this bad? I don't know, right? Just some fascinating research that I heard. This is maybe 2 years ago, but that kids have really have grown to be so accustomed to AI bots in their house that they almost become akin to pets, right? Their Google Homes or their Alexas become almost pet-like, where they have relationships with these entities, and that begs the question of, well, what does that do for our expectations around relationships?
Can they ever compete?
AIs are perfect models, right? They're built to be our whatever, right? They're going to give us everything we want. They're going to be ideal, right? They have no needs. They have no expectations. There's not reciprocity. They're built directly one directional. So, if I feel like my Google Home is supporting me, but yet my partner isn't, which one, how does it distort that? What does that do? What does it do to kids? It's really complicated.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the outcome. So I appreciate that for sure. So we're going to segue into our Flex Fire segment where I'm going to ask you some quick questions. Just give me like top of the mind, quick answers for each. So what's one thing co-parents need to understand?
It's about the kids. The kids are the number one priority.
Complete this sentence. Legacy is
Making a difference.
the biggest misconception about fathers in the research is.
This is a tough one.
You save the good ones for last.
Yeah, right? Fathering is easy to measure.
What's one thing your three boys have told you about fatherhood that your PhD didn't?
Everything.
You just leave it at that.
Like read a book, it doesn't matter. Being a father is completely different.
Yeah. So Pittsburgh dad question. Penguins, Steelers, or Pirates? Which fan bases produce the best fathers? All of them, some of them, or none of them?
Oh, man. I mean, I'm biased to hockey. I have a lot of frustrations with baseball, so I'm gonna put that at the bottom of the list. Steeler dads are pretty top tier. I mean, Pittsburgh has been a Steeler town for a long time. It's a pretty close tie between Penguins and Steeler dads. No offense to the Pirates dads. I think baseball's a great sport. We just need to fix that sports community.
So the last one. So, I'm biased towards the NFL. So you and your three boys, you roll up to a Steelers game. You're like, oh, my friend Andrew and his kids, they're in the tailgate waiting for us. You roll up. Your window comes down. What's the song you're blasting?
First thought was "Let's Get the Party Started" by Andrew WK, and
All
the
right.
reference to that was the old Penguins goal song. So a little shout out to that.
Yeah. Listen, when you're a girl dad and they're 9 and 7, I'm sure my songs might be a little different than yours. Thank God we're at the K-pop and Taylor Swift days, but it's not getting any better anytime soon.
Yeah, we try to keep it light and fun and exciting. I mean, going to a sporting event, it's about having a great time, right? In the community, and let's just have fun together, And so that was my first kind of thing there.
On the Flex Fire, I would ask you on an aside. I offer you two things: a Bubba Burger or skirt steak. What are you biting first?
Probably a skirt steak. I'm a big steak guy. Burgers are great too, but
Soy vey. You heard it here first. That's the best marinade.
there you go.
All right, so I appreciate your time so much, Dan. You gave dads a word for something they've been feeling for years, so thank you for that. And you gave the research world a way to measure it. That definitely matters. And the work you're doing at the intersection of technologies and families, that's the future we're building towards. I'm grateful for your time, your work, the energy you brought today. You're officially part of the Data Up family. So we close every episode, as I told you, with the Dadarian Creed. And then you, Dan, you're going to take us out. So you ready? All right, here we
Let's
go.
do it.
Let's do it. Let's get ready to rumble. I'm a dadder. I don't chase perfect. I chase presence. I lead quiet and confident. I build my family, my foundation, and my legacy. I take reps in patience, discipline, and love. I break old patterns, not promises. Legacy isn't someday, it's today. Dan, take us out.
Let's dad.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate your time. And thank you so much, guys, for listening. Until next time, we'll see you then.